clipping is I shouldn't say that at the start of a video. Everybody shares that clipping is that secret sauce to getting things louder. Even myself, I've shared that. When we share that, we show a single case study with a clipper and then go, if we clip like this, this happens. And it works for that certain scenario. And then you take that and it might work for you once or twice, but then it starts to crumble when you face different material. And that's typically because there's a knowledge gap there in understanding the mechanics of how clippers work and actually real life application of connecting the dots between the theory, the tool, and the use case. That's this masterclass. It's my journey over the past 2 years curated into one video, sharing everything I know about clipping to you guys. Before we dive in, if you love mastering, if you really want to get into the weeds, here's something for you. A 5-day mastering sprint. It's free and it's full of all the best emails that I put out to the newsletter last year. All the juicy stuff, the practical tidbits, techniques, tools. If you want it, there's a link in the description below. And with that, let's jump in. There are 1,000 tutorials on how to use clippers and what to do to get louder masters, but many people fail to explain why these techniques actually work. Understanding why establishes perimeters to the boundaries of our knowledge, and by building those perimeters, it will offer us new opportunities to push past them, experiment, understand what we're doing in the studio and how it interacts with sound. That's why I'm putting this video together. So first, let's briefly establish loudness in terms for this video. We're mainly concerned with short-term LUFS, not because there's a magical number we should aim towards, but because it's a staple and an objective measurement we can anchor off when we look at clipping. Because short-term LUFS is a 3-second RMS K-weighted measurement, which means there's a running 3-second window in which a signal is K-weighted and the RMS signal is measured. Now that formality is out of the way, let's look at the science behind how clipping helps make louder masters. Now, there are 2 aspects to how clipping helps make louder masters. First is in the byproducts in the fidelity of the audio which clipping produces. Now, all sounds comprise individual sine waves. A complex waveform consists of a fundamental sine wave and a unique harmonic sequence of sine waves which each have their own amplitude, decays, and transient information that detail the makeup of that particular sound. Now, you're probably asking, why are you going down Audio 101? I already know this. Well, understanding waveforms, harmonics, and how they relate to RMS values gives us an insight into how clipping makes louder masters. This is important because RMS is an average of a single strength across time. So we need to understand, how is RMS actually calculated? RMS is calculated by finding the root of the sum of each sample point's amplitude to the power of 2 across the number of samples taken. The reason why each sample point is raised to the power of 2 is to avoid negative values cancelling one another out. So let's say that's at negative 20, that's a positive 20, that's at negative 20, you're going to get a reading of 0, whereas negative 20 to the power of 2 is a positive integer. So this sine wave is going to have a relative RMS to the average of all of its sample points amplitude along this line. However, if you go to a square wave, where are the sample points? Well, the sample points are always either maxed out at the top or maxed out at the bottom, so you're going to have a louder RMS. And this has the same sample peak value of negative 20. Yes, there's some crossover distortion there on the square wave going up and down. However, the sample peak's still negative 20 decibels, but the RMS level is 3 decibels louder. Now, we're still on Audio 101 basics, so let's backtrack to when I said all waveforms are made of sine waves. What's happening when your clipper engages? You're actually introducing new harmonics into the signal when you clip it. These harmonics are a byproduct of squaring the top of the waveform off. Thus, this new harmonic information increases the average root mean squared measurement, which in turn feeds into a louder LUFS reading. Okay, and to illustrate this introduction of new harmonics increasing the RMS value, we can see this fundamental stays the same, negative 20 decibel sample true peak. Then I've actually added a third order harmonic. Oh, the RMSs went up 0.7 dB. And then I've added a fifth order harmonic, another odd order harmonic. And we can see as we add these odd order harmonics, it starts to square off the waveform and we get increased RMS value. That's one way the byproduct of clipping helps create louder masters. And also in the same respect, this is the way saturation and harmonic exciters can be used to create louder masters by introducing those harmonics. The second way clipping creates louder masters is that by clipping the peaks of a signal, you buy headroom to gain stage the overall signal up in volume. The greater the amplitude of the signal, which is red, the louder the measurement. I think clippers, saturators, exciters are great on transient information, drums, anything percussive, a rhythm guitar, as the harmonics it introduces are short in nature and won't impede heavily on the sustained tone of elements if it's just clipping the initial transient. And that's also something Luca Predalesi goes on to discuss a bit more in an interview I did with him.
And EQ. So good quality saturation, it's almost a way to kind of like, I'm going to use less compression, I'm going to use less EQ, and I'm going to bring low-level information up. I'm going to get some certain level of perceived loudness. I'm going to actually shave a little bit of transient now. So I'm doing multiple jobs with one piece of gear.
Also, by clipping rogue peaks, it buys you headroom to bring up program material without needing to manipulate the dynamic arrangement or the tonal information of the signal with EQs and compressors, which can cause pumping or change the actual overall shape of the way the material sounds. So that's the science behind how clipping creates louder masters. With this information, if you're processing it all and understanding, yes, clipping, harmonics, more harmonics in odd order series going up the frequency spectrum, you can start to analyze how these processes interact with your own. Why do you put oversampling on a clipper? Because when those harmonics extend outside the Nyquist frequency, you get aliasing distortion. There you go, you learnt that. So I hope this helped you understand a little bit more about how clippers make louder masters, how you can take that information, understanding the byproducts of using a clipper, and use it in your own practice effectively and when you actually need to, not just because you heard it somewhere. You will learn something about this clipper which has stumped me since I got it, and what I learned is changing how I'm going to be using this in mastering forever. So stick around for the exact detail on how I dial this in now. But first, how did I actually start using it? I started using this clipper as a pre-limiting stage to tame off peaks before my main limiter. Concept was, and I'm sure you've heard it before, by clipping rogue peaks, they'd minimize offshoots, triggering over compression from the next limiter. For those of you who haven't seen it, let's just say you have something like a Pro L2 here. We'll dial this in. You see all those big peaks it's dipping? Now let's just add the clipper into the equation and dial that back down. And it minimizes the amount of load the Pro L2 has to do. That's pretty effective and it's a good technique. Now for the last 12 months though, instead of clipping just before my limiter, I've been clipping up front at the very start of the chain, which controls the peaks, feeding all my other dynamic processes, not just my limiter. Now, the way I usually do that is I'll go into RX. Okay, we've got the track here. I'll find the true peak section here, which is 5.3, which is that marker there on the left-hand side. And we'll zoom in. And we'll see, oh, there's a peak there. Well, how much can I actually bring that down? Well, if I go down to the bottom, I can set the clipper to about -8, and I know the body of the track won't be affected, just those offshoot peaks. So I've been setting that up. Let's get rid of this limiter. I'll go in there, -8 is where we're at, and I'll set this at -8 as a hard clipper. And that's been pretty effective for very transient fast material. But there's only so much it can do without compromising the relative energy of each transient here, because this is just straight hard clipping, and depending how fast the transients are will depend on how appropriate it is for the actual track. But with some material, it's almost impossible to have a transparent clip because the transients don't allow it. So I've been playing with this soft clip slider and it's just stumped me. Percentage of what, where, how, why? How does this percentage relate to something practical I can apply? So me being me, I can't settle for percentage. I need to know exactly to the detail how I'm affecting the audio so I can optimize. During that, what's resulted has been so much better. So we're not going to use Soft Clip Classic, and I'll explain why. So the first thing I learned is the Soft Clip function in Soft Clip Classic is a transfer function for the full entire signal, from the very bottom of the noise floor, from the very lowest bit to the very peak. we want to go in Soft Clip Pro because Soft Clip Pro does something very unique. So what this Soft Clip in Soft Clip Pro does, it creates a 2-to-1 logarithm transfer curve from the ceiling down. And I'll explain this a little bit further. So we're at minimum, so it's doing nothing. This would just be hard clipping whenever it hits 0. But what you do is, let's say you go to 25%. See how it says -3? What it's actually doing is, it's actually creating a transfer from -6 to 0. So from from 0 to -6, okay? It creates a logarithm there for a soft clip transfer and then drops the ceiling down to 3 dB. So it compresses the top 6 dB into -3 dB, all right? And so it's always 2-to-1. So if you go -50, you can see -6 there, okay? So it's taking that top 12 decibels of information and creating a logarithmic curve to -6. Now, why is this important? Now, this is what's really astounded me, is the way you can use this to dial in. So now to set it up, instead of going to here, -5.6, I'm actually going down to the body of the track, and the body of the track sort of finishes at around 9.6 here. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to take 4 decibels of information below the peak, compress it down to 2 decibels, and then bring it up. So if I go to here, I can go up to my peak of -5.6, all right? Then with this transfer, go down to 7.6 because that's 2 below it, which means it's taking the top 4, compressing it down to 2. So what you can see here, instead of hard clipping that information down here, it will actually boost everything below it and softly roll it into the ceiling, which in my mind is a really good solution. Now here's the big kicker. You've got all this information. How does it sound? Well, I'll show you the results here in Audio Editor and then we'll have a listen. This is typically how I would hard clip a track, okay? All the peaks, hard clipped, everything underneath not touched. With the soft clipper, it actually brings out some of that information underneath the ceiling and thickens up the sound, and you'll hear this in the A/B. And then I did an extreme version where I did hard clipping extreme, which is there, and then soft clipping extreme. And what's funny is there was more headroom on the soft clipper after the fact than there was the hard clipper. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a listen to each of these with the settings up on the screen so you can see and also listen to the difference between the two. So you can hear it, there's just a little bit more definition there to the transients. And just so we know, when I set these up, I actually set them up so the soft clipper at the top, the hard clipper at the bottom, the transfer curves matched up into the ceiling. So we've got a like for like apples here in terms of overall clipping that's going on. Now let's listen to these settings extreme. So what we're doing here is, instead of it being -4 decibels off the ceiling, or the clipper's ceiling being compressed down to -2 decibels of dynamic range, we've got the top 8 decibels below the clipper being pulled down to 4 decibels of dynamic range with that logarithmic transfer curve. You can see the transfer curve here actually, if you want to see how it's operating and the two differences between them. And let's take a listen, because this is where things get really interesting. You can hear it, the definition, especially on the downbeat of the one with the kick drum. The soft version is much more, like, it's got more poke and bite to it. And this is where things I think I start to really enjoy myself a bit too much with this all, is listening to the subs feel that they're so much more open in the soft clipper. Like, they feel like they're more rounder and they don't fall off. The hard clipper tends to choke them a little bit. So have a listen to these 3 kick hits and I'll A/B the hard one to the soft one. Take a listen. transform the way I'm going to be setting up my clipper. I find my peak level, negative 5.3 on that left channel there. I'll go over to my session. I'll get a clipper. That will go to 5.3. I don't know what is that, 5.6, but 5.3. And then I'll go, well, what's the difference between there and where the body of the instrumentation is? Oh, it's negative 10 or negative whatnot below it, or that in that instance, negative 5 decibels below it. So what I'm looking to track here is, we start there, a soft clip saturator that is a 2.5 decibel full transfer curve. That means it's negative 5 down to 2.5. And then I just bring that down to the ceiling, and that's how I'm going to start my clipping setup process, because it gives me so much more flexibility moving into the ceiling rather than just hard clipping everything. It adds a lot of depth and keeps the dynamics of the masters in a really nice way. So yeah, that was exciting looking that up. It's in the actual manual. It's been in the, I'm leaving this to the end of the video because it's so freaking embarrassing. This Soft Clip Pro transfer function, the detail to it, isn't a secret. It's been in the manual since the plugin was released. I didn't read the manual, and I've just been using the hard clip because I have no clue what the fucking percentage bar does. Now I do, so I thought I'd share it with you. That's a little bit funny for me because I usually read the manuals to everything. This one I don't happen to read. I don't understand it. But now I do, and this is how I'm using it, and it's a big game changer for me. I've been using it actually probably for the last 2 days, literally today and Friday. Today's Monday, but the last 2 days I've been in the studio. I was doing an album this morning. Pretty much everything I was setting up at the start with this process, and everything is coming out beautifully well. Anyway, I'll leave that with you there. A bit of a laugh, and until next time, take care. If you think clippers just chop the top off or limiters just squash the top down, you're not wrong, but it's more complicated than that, especially if you're striving to get loud and clean masters. Take a listen to these 3 snippets and let me know in the comments which one you think is which and which sounds the best.
Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind. Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind. Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind.
So let me know in the comments, and we're going to get to these 3 snippets later on in the video to actually discover what's going on. But first, what is the real difference between clippers and limiters? Digital clippers work using mathematical function. For each sample, the clipper looks at its assigned amplitude value. If it's greater than the threshold value, it will reassign the value of that sample to the threshold value. And if it's less than the negative threshold value, it will reassign the value of that sample to the negative threshold value. Otherwise, it will just leave the samples untouched. For soft clippers, each sample value is modified by a mathematical function like cubic polynomials or trigonomic functions like arctangents. In Venn Audio's free clip, it literally lists the mathematical function it uses to do this. So you've got hard clipping, quintic formula, you've got cubic, hyperbolic tan, algebraic, and we're going to look at arctangent. But what happens is each sample the plugin looks at, and it goes into a for loop, applying this trigonomic function to its amplitude value. Now, to level this up, plugins like Standard Clip offer you a scaling factor, so you can actually control how much of that arctangent is actually processing each of those samples, or how far away those samples are actually being changed in value or soft clipped towards the ceiling. So as I bring this down, you'll see that start to become more of a sine wave, and as I bring it up, it starts to open it back up to a full arctangent function. Now, the result of changing these sample values are harmonics based on how much the sample values have changed. The greater the change in the sample values over longer sequences of samples, the more you can hear it. And this is why clippers are usually used to great effect on things like transient information, because the short burst of samples over the threshold in a very short transient is almost impossible to hear. Those harmonics are almost too quick for the ear to pick up on. Now, that's the whole clippers chop the top off function explained in as detailed terms as I can. For limiters, instead of mathematical functions, they use gain reduction circuits. Those gain reduction circuits receive a sidechain signal, which is usually just the signal itself. And when that signal exceeds the threshold in that gain reduction circuit, the amplitude of the passing signal is reduced. And it's reduced at a ratio of infinity to 1. So it's literally flatlines it. Now,
if your release moves faster than the sample rate, you effectively have a hard clipper. It's basically that for if else loop where if it's above the threshold, it just stays at 0. If it's below, it stays at 0. And if it's moving faster than the sample rate, that release time, you've got a hard clip. But that's not always desirable. And if you're using a limiter that fast, use a hard clipper. But what is good about limiters is the ability to dial in time-bound parameters. And it's what makes limiters a powerful tool, because you can manipulate the release time for a more musical response and ones that don't introduce as many harmonics as clipping does. And it also allows the gain reduction to ebb and flow and move with the music. So what I've got here is this session, and I'm going to go over into Audio Editor. This is the mix we're looking at, and I just thought of this mix off the top of my head to use for it, and I actually didn't realize how perfect it was for a clipper limiter demonstration, because I thought this didn't have much transient information at all, and actually had lots of transient and lots of sustain information, which makes it the perfect example to showcase the use of clippers and limiters together in best case scenarios. Now, when you look at something like this, these really sharp transients, if we just use a limiter, what's going to end up happening is if you look at limiter only, so if you look here, you've got these transients which come up. And if I go into limiter only, I've got a version where I've just applied limiting to it. We can look at the transients and we're going to listen to this. It ducks and you can see the release there. Every time it hits, it has this sort of like scoop to it, okay? What we actually want to do is those sharp transients we want to clip. Now, if we clip off all of those transients, it's going to be pretty noticeable, because if we go to chop off 4 decibels of transient, you're going to get a lot of crackling. And that's probably what you might have heard in the first demonstration I showed you. That first file I was playing was just hard clipping -4 decibels. And why we do this is to buy headroom, but this just crackles when you're actually hard clipping 4 decibels of transient information.
Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind. I wish you were.
That's not good. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to use the hard clipper at 2 decibels. So anything that's below that 2 decibel ceiling, we're going to cut off with hard clipping. And if we go to our loudest peak at 0.18, that's our loudest peak, you can see how many samples this is going to pull. I'm going to just move over to this loudest peak. So at -2 decibels, we're clipping at any instance 3 or 4 samples. Now, 3 or 4 samples, I've said this example before on the channel, over 48,000 samples a second. That's almost instantaneous. You're not going to hear the distortions this introduces. And just to showcase that, let's actually set that up here on this channel here. We're going to enter standard clip, and we're going to set the limiter at -2 decibels. And we'll actually go over to that time marker. Where is it? 41 seconds.
Can't be held back when now I'm.
Okay, listen to that.
'Cause I can't be held back when now I'm.
We'll actually play it at its loudest peak, where the clipper's doing the most amount of clipping to the sample, the biggest change in value.
'Cause I can't be held back when now I'm finally doing me. 'Cause I can't be held.
So if I just loop that click there and turn the clipper on and off.
Can't be, I 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 can't.
Very, almost indistinguishable, okay, that clipping.
Can't be, I can't be, I can't be, I can't be.
Almost indistinguishable, that clipping, and that's important. So that's the first stage I would address this. I'd use hard clipping for those very short, 4 or 5 samples that just go over. And here's the hard clip version of what we just did. But I want to be able to buy myself a little bit more headroom. These peaks are going to still chew up quite a bit if we're trying to drive loudness. We know that we can't do hard clipping on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Soft Clip Pro and slowly push up into there. Now, how we're going to judge that is we're going to go into here and we're going to meter -4 decibels, okay? And by metering here, we can look and see, maybe not -4, that looks a little bit aggressive because we're getting some of the body. We don't want to be clipping the sustained portion of the signal, those big parts of the body. Let's actually go to the loudest section. It's probably a bit too hard. Let's just pull it back a little bit. -3. Okay, so to get -3 soft clipping from here, we want to be at 2.5. And that's going to allow the arctangent curve to start at -3 into that ceiling of 2. So let's have another listen to this and see how we're coming along.
I wish it were. Nothing felt like it was changing, but nothing felt.
That is the clipping portion. That's all the transient information. Now, if we want to push it louder than this, or we want to keep driving it without getting that distortion, what we're going to look at using is the limiter. Now, this limiter I've set up here is -4 decibels, which is that whole amount of headroom that we wanted to manage in the first place, but just on a limiter. And what you're going to see and hear is that whenever that kick comes in, it ducks. It will not distort. It won't distort. It'll just duck and pump. So take a listen to this.
Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind. Say.
So you can hear that bass. Every time the kick comes in, the bass just, it's like it's got a sidechain like compressor on it, because that limiter is releasing back up. So we can't do that much limiting all on its own. What we actually need to do is add a limiter here. Okay, going to add a limiter, L1, and I'm using L1 just because it's bare bones simple. We're not getting into the fancy frills of different kinds of clipper functions and etc. I just want to understand the ballistics of it, or I want you guys to understand the ballistics of it. So hard clipping, really good for super short transients and why, the mathematical function, and soft clipping, really good for leaning into those transients because you control with the scaling factor. I think the soft tube clipper has this as well, and a few other plugins have this scaling factor for that mathematical function to allow you to soft clip into the ceiling really nicely. Now the limiter here, we're going to set to -4 because we're coming out of this standard clip at -2. I reckon we can afford to be at -4. We'll set the ceiling to -2, and let's just see how much pumping we get. If it's too much, we might have to dial that threshold back.
Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it.
A little bit much. Let's go -3.
Go on. Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind.
Now let's listen to hard clipping only, limiting only, and then the combination of hard, soft clipping and limiting gently used in conjunction with one another. So with the hard clipping we'll listen to first, you're going to hear just those little crackles at the top.
Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind.
Okay, you heard that little bit of crackling just at the top. Now the limiting, you're just going to hear the pumping of it jumping back up on itself.
Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind.
You hear that just pumping up, and we don't want that effect. We want it to be nice and consistent and clean. And this version here, what we have is we've got the hard clipping at -2, the soft clipper up into the ceiling. It's only 1 decibel of arctangent moving in because we've scaled it by 0.4%. And then we've got the limiter at the end. So you've got the hard clipping, a little bit of soft clipping, a little bit of limiting all together.
Easy to say it was mutual, but don't think it was in my mind.
So the reason why I wanted to present this to you is because clipping is just more complicated than saying it chops the top off. And limiters are more complicated than saying it just ducks the top down. They have different functions. One runs off mathematical functions where it alters the sample values one by one, and that has a very profound effect on the sound. And understanding how hard clippers and soft clippers work is really powerful to helping you get louder masters. And the same with limiters. They're not looking at the sample values like a clipper are. They're using gain reduction circuits like a compressor does, and they've got ballistics to the time domain parameters so they can move a little bit more smoothly around sustained passages. Anyway, I hope that helps you out, and until next time, take care.
All right, quick pause, because if you made it this far in the video, you might be getting something out of this clipping masterclass, and I want to invite you to get something more. 5-day mastering sprint. It's completely free. There's a link in the description below, and it's, like I said at the start, the best juice, technical advice, tutorial sort of emails which I put together last year for the newsletter. I'll let you get back to it, but otherwise, while you're watching this, there's a link in the description where you can sign up. Let's get back to it.
I'm going to show you a snippet from my stem mastering masterclass. This is from one of the lessons where we go over clippers, and not just in a traditional sense, using a clipper on the stereo bus to manage the little peaks going over, but using clippers on individual stems to feed the clipper in the stereo bus, so that way you can manage the crest factor and the amount of clipping going on to actually get a more punchier, dynamic, louder master without all the artifacts and effects of just clipping at one stage. So something I like to do, which we can do in stem mastering, which you can't do in stereo mastering, is through process of elimination, manage the clipping before we even hit the clipper. By that I mean manage the culprit of the stem that is chewing up that headroom before we hit the clipper. And sometimes you have the luxury of being able to be aggressive on this, sometimes not, because it can change the material too far. But this is how I do it. I'll loop the loudest peak, and then through process of elimination, we can mute the elements and see which one is actually causing that over. I'm going to tell you it's going to be the drum bus because you can hear it is that snare that's popping, but let's just entertain the idea of how different elements interact with one another as well, because sometimes simply pulling down another element adjacent to the transient element can actually mitigate that over because of the way they're summing together. So let's have a listen. Did you see that? The bass line made a big difference to the amount of clipping happening there. Now we'll do the drums, and obviously that's going to make a big change. So the bass actually interacts with the clap of the drums in a very unique way that it is actually affecting that peak level. And like I said, that is to do with just the way harmonics, or not the harmonics, the harmonic structure which is generated through the summing of those two elements causes those peaks and nulls, which has caused that peak that's hitting the clipper. So how can we manage that? So there's a few different ways. It gets interesting because on a technical front, we can shift and move around the phase of the bass or drums with an all-pass filter. But the danger of that is you affect its relationship to all the other elements. So I want to stick to either gain, so just simply gaining up or down the element, or using, a clipper. We can use a clipper on the individual element to mitigate it. So let's play with the two for now. So let's have a clipper on the drum bus, okay? And then we'll also have a clipper on the bass, which we won't use just yet unless we need it. So at the moment, we've got the clipper at the bottom. This clipper here is the clipper on the stereo out. And we've got a clipper on the drums. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring the clip portion at 0, and then we're going to slowly bring it down and see if it helps mitigate the amount of clipping on this side of the equation. Now, as it currently sits, I don't like, even though this clipper is controlling the overall clipping going into the stereo bus, it's starting to affect other elements within the stem, which otherwise aren't needed to be clipped, like that kick drum on the downbeat. I just want to hit that snare, so that just tames off a little bit. So we're going to find the best of two worlds. So I want to just back this off until it's not hitting that kick drum anymore, which seems to be at around -10. And that's good. Now, if I turn this off, we have subtly more clipping. I'm going to put it back on. And now we can explore if the bass is aided in this. Now, there's going to be some caveats to using this technique, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So let's just manage this bass side of things. I'm going to just pull this down here because the output was cranked because I just made a copy from the stereo. Let's pull this down ever so slightly. Just want to visually see what am I clipping here. I'm just clipping that first one there. That's good. Okay. So now if we turn these two off, actually we can just turn this input only monitor off and that will help us see. Okay, see there, a lot of clipping going on there. We've got 3 decibels clipping there. And then as I turn this on, okay, that's much more controlled. There's less energy coming into there. Now, I said there would be some caveats to doing this sort of processing because as we clip things early on in the chain, it mitigates not mitigates, I don't think that's the right word. It limits our ability to move the phase of signals because what will happen is we will compromise where that clipped portion is in the waveform. And by clipping those portions, we buy ourselves headroom to move out. But I'm just going to show you something here, which is quite an interesting and fun task to do. I'm going to get a signal generator here. I'm going to just show you this in practice because this is going to make a lot more sense. We're going to go 55 Hertz. We're going to get an oscilloscope, that we can see this. We're going to bring this signal up to 0 because it's going to make it slightly easier to look at and observe. And what we're going to do here is, yes, we're going to clip this. We are clipping this 55 Hertz sine wave. Now, if we place processors before this, so let's say we get an EQ. Yeah, an EQ 1 band is fine. We add a low pass. The waveform is still symmetrical, even though we're clipping it, which is fine. But what I want you to observe now is what happens if I place this filter after the clipper. Oh, that is really odd. What's actually happening here is because you're introducing phase to the signal, you are shifting, you're effectively shifting. What you're actually doing is you're rotating the phase of the waveform, and instead of that clipped portion being at the very top, buying you headroom, you're shifting it and creating new peaks. So what this means is any processes like pass filters or steep notches around the same frequencies that get clipped will shift the frequency of the waveform off axis and then basically reconstruct new peaks and then add distortion to the side. So you're getting the harmonics of the clipping, but you're not getting the benefit of extra headroom, which is what this process is there to set it up for. So as it currently stands, we've got a bit of clipping happening on the bass, a little bit of clipping happening on the drums in order to manage how hard we're hitting our clipper here. Now this was set to -8, which is good. Yeah, so that is all set up so this clipper doesn't work as hard. We have a little bit of clipping on the drums, a little bit of clipping on the bass. So this just means if we do any pass filters on the bass, if we do any pass filters on the drums, we need to make sure it happens before the clipper. And that's actually why I've left an insert before the clippers at every stage here, so that I can bring that up to there. There's space there for us to add pass filters or phase rotating filters of any sort before the clipper if we choose to do so. Now, if you found that valuable, there's another 2.5 hours of curriculum for the masterclass, which there's a link to in the description below. I hope to see you there, and until next time, take care.
And what I want to do is look at hard clipping specifically and case study and walk through use cases for it, or a use case for it. Now, this is a contrived example because this case study calls for hard clipping as the most transparent solution. But in part of that, what I want to do is present this case study alongside utilizing soft clipping as an alternative, compression as an alternative, limiters as an alternative. And the reason why I want to do that is because I think something has been not dangerous, but silly of me, or maybe not silly, maybe just I've had my blinders on to, is the fact that when I present information, I'm really excited about it and I showcase my sessions because I love showing real sessions from projects and whatnot and how they're carried along. But also people can interpret that as commonplace for a process they can replicate across every single session they do themselves. So what I'm going to be doing here is in this case study, present to you very specific details and understanding about exactly why a certain processor is being used and how. Okay, and that is to do with hard clipping. So I have this mix here. Okay, this mix here is really beautiful song, Break a Good Man's Heart. And the true peak level is -2. It has very sharp offshoot peaks. Okay, so that's a very specific thing. Very sharp transient offshoot peaks. The loudest peak is -2 decibels. Okay, and that peak lasts a total of 4 samples. Okay, 4 samples, 48,000 samples a second. It's 1/12,000th of a second. If you go into auditory filters in terms of with psychoacoustics and temporal masking, any sort of artifact in that short of a period of time is almost indistinguishable and not noticeable. But the case study here is I want to bring that down to -5. Okay, I want to bring that peak and buy myself 3 decibels of headroom as transparently as possible. So what I've got set up here is a hard clipper. Okay, then I've got a soft clipper set up in the same fashion. I've got a null test here so we can hear the effect of both of them. I've got a compressor, okay, with a 2:1 ratio, -9 decibels threshold, and a peak detection circuit that produces the same peak value, so -5 decibel peak value out, and maintains the same amount of loudness as both the soft clipping and hard clipping. They both produce -17 LUFS on the output and -5 decibels peak value. And then a limiter as well, +5, -5, and we can monitor the delta of the limiter. We can monitor the delta of the compressor, and by safe soloing the clipping delta signal that's phase inverted, we can actually listen to the effect of the hard and the soft clipper. So I'm going to play these back, and then we'll go into each one and a bit about what it is actually doing to the signal. So the first one is the hard clipper. So let's play the hard clipper quickly. We'll open that up.
Yeah, you finally did me a favor, and you walked right out that door. And I haven't looked back ever since you left. And oh boy, it feels so good. 'Cause she's
So you can see all those little red peaks, just getting those little bits shaved off. Now we'll look at the soft clipper.
yeah, you finally did me a favor, and you walked right out that door. And I haven't looked back ever since you left. And oh boy, it feels so good.
Now you notice with the soft clipper, not only are the peaks red, but some of the body also gets shaded in red because the transfer function, it's a tangential curve or whatever it is, transfer function is changing the values of everything below that peak as well in order to match up with that transfer curve. So not only is it affecting the peak, it is affecting samples below the peak. We'll listen to the compressor, and then again, we're going to get into more detail as we get deeper into this video.
Yeah, you finally did me a favor, and you walked right out that door. And I haven't looked back ever since you left. And oh boy, it feels so good. 'Cause she's that kind of girl.
Okay, beautiful. And now we can look at the limiter.
Yeah, you finally did me a favor, and you walked right out that door. And I haven't looked back ever since you left. And oh boy, it feels so good.
Now let's listen to the delta, and after we listen to the deltas, we're going to look at the waveform data in Isotope RX to actually see exactly what's happening to those sample points. So let's listen to the delta of the hard clipper. Okay, that's just the little peaks. Now the soft clipper. Okay, now let's listen to the delta of the compressor. And now the delta of the limiter. So what we just heard there is the difference signal. So everything that particular processor is changing about that signal path. So if you notice with the hard clipper, it's not changing all that much. It's just those little small peaks that it's changing. And what does that mean with the audio? So let's actually look at Isotope RX editor. Here's the original signal. There's the peak. Now let's look at the hard clipper. That peak, those 1, 2, 3, 4 samples, completely gone. Every other single sample point, okay, every other single sample point goes untouched. Now, let's look at the soft clipper. Ooh, wait a second, a little bit more change there. What was that? Okay, so you've got this peak here. Okay, if I'll just get a little square like that, you've got this peak here that gets changed, and these ones down here, which aren't above the ceiling, but they change. Okay, so that's the original one. That's the new one. Okay, we'll have that highlighted there. Original, new. Okay, so what it's actually doing, that transfer function isn't just changing samples above that ceiling, which I want to achieve. It's affecting all the samples leading in to that value as well. And that's why when we did the null test, we were hearing more than just those little peaks over -5 decibels. We were hearing everything subtly beneath it also getting changed and shaped and affected. And that introduces harmonics to other parts of the signal and colors the tone of it. Now let's look at the limiter. Okay, so this is the original and the limiter. So I think the limiter's function might have a bit of a look ahead, because you can see that peak before the big one is getting equally reduced in volume. So that might just be that particular mode, that modern balance mode, sorry, of limiting that has a bit of look ahead that's compensating ahead. Okay, and that's helping to smooth out that top to prevent distortions or as much distortion or minimize those distortions. And finally, we have the compression here. And that affects a lot. And you can see everything that happens in the release. So you've got the attack portion here, and then the attack portion here, and then the release portion of the compressor around here. And you can see that change because the gain reduction's holding down for 80 milliseconds until it releases. So you got that there, and then the release there. That there, and then the release there. Okay, so the compressor is actually controlling a lot more. That's probably the least transparent. It doesn't mean it's not a good tool. It doesn't mean any of these are bad tools, but I'm just making a point for the case study of controlling those peaks in the most transparent way. I want to affect as little of all the signal in here. I want to affect as little as possible. And if it means sacrificing 4 sample peaks for the sake of keeping the rest of the signal completely one-to-one neutral, it means I can buy a lot of headroom and have a very clean, transparent, loud master in this circumstance, where this case study, where this particular track allows me the flexibility to use a hard clipper in this fashion. So let's just have another listen back, and we're going to go over that very loud peak. Everything is level matched as well, remember that. And the peak values are all -5, if not, some of them are -4.7, some are -5.1, but they're all within that ballpark at trying to achieve the same purpose. So let's just loop these 3 seconds where that peak is and go through each one by one.
Did me a favor, and you walk it, 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 did me a favor, and you walk.
So again, remember, this is a contrived example. I've got a particular goal: manage the short peaks, those short little bursts above, in order to buy myself headroom. And I wanted to present this in an open-minded way to the community, because I don't think any single processor should be labeled as a scam or as something that is bad and dangerous and the devil. No, everything has a use case, and maybe you might find videos of me doing that. And if I have ever, spoken out of line, or you see me speak out of line, call me out on it. Okay, call me out on it, because I want to learn. And this is just me presenting to you, the community, my use case, the things I'm doing in my studio so we can all learn together in a positive and encouraging way. Anyway, with that, I'm going to get back to my day. I've got one more session to get off, then I get to go home. So until next time, take care. All right, so you made it to the end, and there are a lot of concepts we spoke about in the masterclass. What I'm going to invite you to do is backtrack to any of these time markers to rewatch any of the videos, take more notes, really get into the thick of it, ask questions below. As well as this, if you want to keep this conversation going, if you want to get into my brain a little bit more, the 5-day mastering sprint, free sign up down below. They go straight out to your email with really practical tips that are really going to help elevate your masters. Hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, take care.